Okay, so the Heilige Gemara. The Heilige Mishnah starts with Arba Rosh Hashanah Hey. There are 4 Rosh Hashanahs. The Echad ben Nisan, on the first day of Nisan, is Rosh Hashanah l'Malachim. It's Rosh Hashanah for Malachim. And Rashi says that it's actually referring to the year that we count the Malachei Umay Sa'olam. Why is that important for us? Rashi says, Mishum Shalom Malchus. We need to show some deference to the Malchus, and therefore we even count our years and our stars according to the years of the Malchus. However, Tosfos argues, and Tosfos says that it's the Malchei Yisrael that we're referring to, and it's pretty apparent in the Gemara that it's the Malchei Yisrael. And Tosfos says that Rashi, who mentions Mishum Shalom Malchus, and he's referring to Gemara and Gittin, because in fact by Gittin we do defer to the Malchei Olam al Shalom Malchus, but not by stars. I'm sorry? Respect. I meant respect. Oh, deference. Okay, thank you for correcting me. This way, maybe I'll learn English in the process too. That's why I like to use ArtScroll, because then I can learn English. Okay, so let's see the Gemara fighter. So Bechad b'nitzim Rosh Hashanah l'Malachim, Ula Regalim, and for Yom Tovim, which the Gemara will explain. Bechad be'Elul, the first day of Elul is Rosh Hashanah l'Ma'aser Behema. Again, we know that Ma'aser Behema has to be done in batches, and you cannot mix one batch from the other batch. So the cutoff to the end of each yearly batch, each annual batch, is Echad be'Elul. That batch changed with Ma'aser Behema is also on our regular Rosh Hashanah on Rosh Tishrei. Echad b'Tishrei, but everybody agrees that Echad b'Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah l'Shanim. That's when we count our years, which the Gemara will explain. Ula Shmitin, Ula Yoivlois. There's restrictions in what you're allowed to do in a field on Shemitah and Yovel. Those restrictions set in Midairaisa on Rosh Tishrei. The Netiya for plantings, and Rashi says that it's referring to when you count the first 3 years that a tree produces pears, you count those 3 years based on Rosh Hashanah. So if a tree started producing pears before Rosh Hashanah, that's already called the end of the first year once the first year passes. Okay? And then this comes in Yerakos. The Yerakos is Ma'aser Yerakos. The cutoff date for the batch is Rosh Hashanah. Be'echad b'Shvat, Rosh Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, and that's L'gabi Ma'aser, taking Ma'aser from fruits of a tree. And Rashi tells us that while by vegetables you wait for the Gemar tree, and by grain you wait for it to be mostly grown, the birth of the peri is the chanata, is the blossoming. That's when the peri is considered born. So as long as the chanata was before Rosh Hashanah, it's in last year's batch. If the chanata was after Rosh Hashanah, it'll be next year's batch. That's Kedivra Beishamai. But Basil holds, Basil B'chamisha Asabai, our Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanis that we celebrate is Tu B'Shvat. What is it relevant to us to know that you have a special day for Malachim? In other words, Rashi says more clearly, why is it that we have to have a specific day where the year of the king changes over? Why can't every king have their own anniversary date based on when he became king? And whenever he became king, that's where you'll start counting. And then the next year is when it goes up to the second year. Why does it have to be a specific month? It's very relevant for stories because Allah is if someone backdates a shtar chayv, it's puzzle. It's completely puzzle, and meaning it'll have the status of a milv al peh. The significance of a milv b'shtar is that you could be torah from the lekuchos, meaning the malva has a right to claim any field that the loiva sold after the loan was given and after the shtar was given. So there was a coil. It's almost like placing a lien. People will know about it. If someone purchases a piece of property from the loiva after a milva b'shtar, so he knows that he's subject to the risks of losing that field if the malva has to come take it from him because the person he bought it from, the loiva, didn't pay up. However, if one backdates a shtar, clearly he's looking to rip off, to steal from the lekuchos that were there, that purchased fields even before the halva. Because of that, they passed the shtar completely. And although he can use it to claim from the loiva, but he will not be able to claim any fields, even fields that we know for sure the loiva sold after the halva was given. But if you have a post-dated star, that will be fine because no one is getting taken advantage of. Now, so Rashi explains, if the year where the anniversary changes from one year to the next, if that's based on when the king started, so then there is no fixed date where the year changes. And therefore, it can become a little bit confusing because we don't know, for instance, if the king's anniversary is an ER, well then if the star was written in Nisan, we don't know if it was Nisan before the ER or Nisan after the ER, and it could become confusing. But if we know every year that Nisan is the changeover date, then it won't be confusing and we'll be able to keep track of these stars. That's a Rashi learns. Tosha says, I don't understand why we would have a problem. Everybody knows when the king became king, and the Seifim who wrote stars every day for sure keep that in mind because they're always watching. So Tosha doesn't like that shot, and Tosha says it's a more fine type of issue, and it's if he became king on the second day of the month, the Seifim might make a mistake and think that he became king on the first day of the month, and a mistake of one day will end up having the impact of a whole year. That's why it's a little bit more confusing. But I'll call upon them. That's why we have a specific date where we say that the king enters his second year, his third year, where his year changes based on the specific date. Taner Rabban, Melach Sha'amad be'esrim v'tisha ba'adar. A melech that got in right under the line at the end of the year, at the 29th day of Adar. Kivan she'agia echad b'nisan. After his first day in office, and echad b'nisan arrives, also lo Hashana, we already say that he's in the second year of his kingdom. But if he was not appointed to be king until a day later, then ein moin shana at she'agia nisan acher. So in one case, one day did it. In the other case, he needed a full year. Amar Mar, Melech she'amad be'esrim v'tisha ba'adar kiban she'agia echad b'nisan. Once echad b'nisan arrives, also lo shana. It counts like his as a whole year. What is the chiddush of that? It's pretty straightforward. Ha kamash rolon zok gemara. The chiddush that we know from this line, from this halacha, of this memor, is the Nisan Rosh Hashana l'malachim. That it's Nisan that changes the year. And we learn another thing. Even if the king was only a king for one day, that we give him credit for a whole year. But if he didn't become king until the first day of Nisan, then we don't consider him in the second year until the next Nisan passes. It's not clear if it's Malchus Yisrael or Malchus. That's right. It's not clear. That's why there's room for Rashi and Tosfos to discuss it. So Zok Gemara Pshita. It's a very pashut. Why do I need this extra case? If I know that if he became king Rosh Chodesh at the end of Adar, the moment Nisan comes, it changes. So I also know that if he became king much earlier, he has to wait until Chodesh Nisan. So the Imnu Alei Me'ad. Our presidents, they get voted in November, but the inauguration isn't until January. So what if he was already voted in, Parliament already put him in place in Adar, but the actual day of the inauguration where he assumes the power is in Nisan? You might think that you should give him both years. In other words, you should say that he's already a king in Adar. So when Nisan comes, we consider it a second year. Kamash Rolan, that it doesn't work that way. It's only once he holds the nuclear codes. Once he's actually inaugurated. Tanya Rabban, Meis Ba'adar. What if the prior king dies in Adar? The Amad Acher Tachta Ba'adar. And in that same month, a new king took his place. So whose year is this? Zok the Braisa, Moinin Shana Lazeh Vilazeh. When you write the star, you can either write year 10 to King A, or you can write year 1 to King B. Either one is acceptable. Mes ben Nisan. What if the king died in Nisan? V'amud acher tachta ben Nisan. Well, then moinin shana lazeh v'lazeh. Once again, this could be year 11 for King A, or it could be year 1 for King B. What about Meis Ba'adar? But the Amod Acher Tachta B'Nisan. The original king died in Adar, and the second king didn't get inaugurated until Nisan. So then, Moinin Rishayna Rishayn, Ushni Lashani. Before this, it's called year 10 of the prior king, and after Nisan, it's considered year 1 of the new king. So the Gemara is going to drill down to understand what the Chedushim of all these cases are, because they seem to be pretty straightforward. Amar Mar, Meis Ba'adar, V'amad Acher Tachta Ba'adar, Moinin Shana Lazeh Vilazeh. Pshita. That's pretty pashut. Why would I think otherwise? So Kamar Mao de Tema, you might have said that Shata Levei Trei Loi Beninan, you can't give a year to two people. And Rashi says, just to the left, Shata Levei Trei Loi Beninan, Mishanichnas Bo HaMelech Shemeis, Afilo Yom Echad. Once this month is already under the domain of the prior king, Lo Yichtavu Kol Shonazu Bishtar Leminyan Melech Hoivid. Now this entire year is disqualified from being used towards the new king. Now this year has sort of been claimed by the earlier king. Allah Melech HaMeis. Kamash Malon, that no, you can give the same year to the earlier king as well as to the new king. Meis ben Nisan, v'amad achar tachta ben Nisan. What if the first king died in Nisan, and the second king was appointed again in this Monin Shana Lazeh V'Lazeh? Pshita. Here you can't say that the chiddush is that two kings could share a month, because we already know that from the prior case. So Ma'od Tema, is b'sayv shana. When do you say Yom Echad b'shana chasav shana? That's at the end of the year. But at the beginning, so where are we standing here? We're standing here in Mes ben Nisan, v'amar achar tachta ben Nisan. So when would you say Yom b'shana chasav shana? That's at the end. But for the new king, for the new king to say, let me just see Rashi. I don't want to mix this up. B'sayv shana. Rashi says, when do you say Yom Echad b'shana chasav shana? Is at the end of the year. Koin melech ba'omed ba'adar, a king who is in Adar. Kol shaloi shana k'shiyotz Adar. When Adar is over, now his year is over. V'choshev v'loi yom sheb'sayv shana zu, the year at the end of this month. So we're talking about a king who was first appointed on the last day of Adar. The king was first appointed on the last day of Adar, then that one day acts for him as an entire year. So that when the day changes, when he reaches the second day of Malchus, we already consider it his second year. But maybe the king who died on the first day of Nisan, maybe the king who died who only survived one day into the next year, maybe we wouldn't consider that his year. If a king died on the first day of Nisan, we will not write shtaris referring to this year as the last year of the king that passed. Rather, we'll say that it belongs exclusively to the king that took over. Kamash Malon, that even in such a case, we allow the date to be distributed to both kings. Meis ba'adar v'amud acher tachta b'nisan. So now we have the next case that we're trying to see what the chiddush is. The first king died in Adar, so that year is exclusively his. V'amud acher tachta b'nisan, and the next month should be exclusively the new kings. And in fact, that's the halacha. Moinin rishayna rishayna shni l'shayna. Correct the more pshita. That's also pashut. Why do I need a brayso to tell me that? So tomorrow la tricha the imnu alei me'adar. They had already appointed him in Adar. Melech ben Melechu, and he's also a king, the son of a king. So his malchus is sort of connected, and he's destined to become the Melech. Why do we need this extra information? Because if you just want to tell you the chiddush is the imla elay ma'adar, we already know that chiddush. At the top of the Amud, we already learned that chiddush. So this brayso must be telling you an additional chiddush over the fact that if someone is elected in 1 year and then actually inaugurated the next year, that he's counted from the next year, not from the original year. We need a bigger chiddush than that. So the chiddush is not only did that happen, but in addition to that, he was the incumbent. He was the one who was most likely to be a king because his father was a king. And Rashi tells us very, very interesting. Rashi says, the time of Shaldover, Malchus Yerusha. Malchus goes to Yerusha. So right away here, this seems to show that we're talking about a Melech Yisrael. Rashi learns we're speaking about a melech of Soilim. Let's let the new king count last year as well. Why? Because even though he wasn't inaugurated yet, but he was the natural replacement for his father. Kamash Malon, even there, we won't give him that year, and his first year is the second year in this equation. So now we need to know what is the Makor for all this. Where do we get this from? Why is Nisan the month that we used to change over? The whole reason we discussed until now is it needs to be one individual month, so you won't get confused. If there's a different, if each king became king on a different day, there'll be a different anniversary. It can get confusing. So we have to pick one day. Why was it Echad B'Nisan that was picked? Shenamar, it says, Vayihi b'shmoinim shana. This is Malachim. Vayihi b'shmoinim shana va'arba me'at shana. Let's say Bnei Yisrael merit Mitzrayim. This is when the Beis Hamikdash was put up. It was 480 years after Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim. B'shana Revius, it was the fourth year. So it was 480 years from Yitzis Mitzrayim, but it was the fourth year of Shlomo HaMelech having been king. The Chodesh Ziv, it was in Chodesh Ziv, which Rashi tells us is Chodesh Iyar, which is the second month, because it's after Nisan. So the Chodesh Ziv, Hu HaChodesh HaSheni, LaMelech Shlomo Al Yisrael. So we're comparing here, in one pasuk, the pasuk is counting the timing of Shlomo HaMelech's Malchus, and it's also talking about the timing since we left Mitzrayim. Makdish Malchus Shlomo Litis Mitzrayim. We're making a hekesh between the counting of Shlomo HaMelech's years to the counting of the years since we left Mitzrayim. My Yitis Mitzrayim Minisan, just like where do we count from? By Yitis Mitzrayim, we count from Nisan. That became the month that we count from. Af Malchus Shlomo, so too Malchus Shlomo is Minisan, we count from Nisan. So it's interesting. So Jeshtikol Gzerish Shava made Lagabe this halacha to learn up when you start from. The Yitzis Mitzrayim Gufam Minalim, the Menisa Mininim. How do we know that when we count Yitzis Mitzrayim, we count from Nisan? Dilma Mitishrei Mininim. Maybe even by Yitzis Mitzrayim, we count from Tishrei. And Rashi points out, what do you mean? We left Mitzrayim in Nisan. So if we look at Rashi, Ema Mitishrei, which is about an inch and a half down in the Gemara from where we are, Ema Mitishrei, Aval Pisha Yotzu B'Nisan. Nevertheless, maybe Mishagia Tishrei Korila Shadashniya. Maybe when the first Tishrei arrived after they left Mitzrayim, they started calling it the second year. Lefisha Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah Lashanim, Hanimnin Labrias Oilam. Well, didn't hear Mitzrayim. Since Tishrei, why is Tishrei a logical month to start from? Because that's where the world started it. So it makes sense to start counting from Tishrei. So to Gemara, Yitzis Mitzrayim, Gufa Minolam, the Nitzam Minimum. So to Gemara, Dilma Mitishrei Minimum. Maybe we should count from Tishrei, even for Yitzis Mitzrayim. So to Loi Solkadai, it doesn't seem to be that way if you analyze the Psukim. The Chsivit says, when the Torah was discussing in Chukas, when Aaron HaKohen passed away, it says, Vayal Aaron HaKohen al Har Ahar, al Pi Hashem, Vayom Hashem, and this is the key, Bishnas Ha'arboim, let's say Bnei Yisrael Merit Mitzrayim. It was the 40th year after Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim, the Chodesh HaChamishi. Chodesh HaChamishi is referring to Av. So let's talk about this. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. So the Chodesh HaChamishi Bechad HaChodesh. So Aaron HaKohen's child is Rosh Chodesh Av. And then the pasuk says in Devarim, Vahi Barboim Shana. It was the 40th year, so the same year as Aaron HaKohen died. Va'ashte Aser Chodesh, on the 12th month, on the 11th month, which would be Av. I'm sorry, not Av, which would be Shvat. Vahi Barboim Shana, Va'ashte Aser Chodesh. It was on Shvat of the 40th year. The Echad LaChodesh Diber Moshe. So let's think about this. We were standing earlier by the Misa of Aaron HaKohen in Chodesh Av, and it was called year 40, and then the following Shvat, the Chai B'Shvat, and months later in Shvat, we're still in the same year, and in between, we know for sure Rosh Hashanah passed, because let's count from up. Elul, Tishrei. So Rosh Hashanah passed, Chedron, Kislev, Teves, Shvat. So since the following Shvat was still considered the same year, Mechlal de Rosh Hashanah Lav Tishrei. That's how we know that they couldn't have counted the change of the year from Tishrei. because otherwise, by that point, it would have been 41. Correct. Gemara, Bishlam Aheich, Mefarish, Ilitzias Mitzrayim. I understand that the first part of the pasuk says Beferish, we're counting from Yitzias Mitzrayim, because it says Vahivish Shmoinim Shana V'Arba Meishana L'Tzeis B'nei Yisrael Me'et Mitzrayim. It's very, very specific. Elahai Mikan Del Yitzias Mitzrayim Dilma La'Kamas Hamishkan. How do you know that here in this? One second. Let's look at this, the psukim and chukas. I'm sorry, I mixed up the psukim. The pasuk that describes Aaron dying in Av says specifically that we're counting from when Yidden left Mitzrayim. But when it talks about in Devarim, where it says there it doesn't say where we're counting from. So maybe there we're not counting from Yitzias Mitzrayim. Maybe there we're counting from Hakamas HaMishkan, and then there's no comparison anymore between the dates. You cannot extrapolate when Rosh Hashanah is. So the Gemara could Amar Papa, like our Papa said, Shnas Esrim, L'Gzer Shava. This is a very big chiddush. It says Shnas Esrim, and Rav Papa is referring to a different case, not in our case. Rav Papa elsewhere says that there's two different psukim, and we want to say that they're similar in their dates. So we make a Gzer Shava. It says Shnas Esrim in one place. It says Shnas Esrim in another place. L'Gzer Shava. Hakanami, so too in our case, when we're comparing the story that happened when Aaron HaKohen died and the story at the beginning of the Devarim, it says Shnas Harboim L'Gzer Shava. It says Ahibar Boim Shana when Moshe spoke to Klal Yisrael, and it says when Aaron died, it was Shnas Harboim. So we make a Gzer Shava from Shnas Harboim to Shnas Harboim, and we say Makan L'Yitzias Mitzrayim, just like when Aaron died, it was Shnas Harboim L'Yitzias Mitzrayim, Afkan L'Yitzias Mitzrayim. So too when Moshe was speaking to Klal Yisrael, and it uses the term Shnas Harbayim, it means Shnas Harbayim from Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is very, very interesting. If we look at the first wide line at the bottom of Rashi, Rashi speaks about this Gzer Shava, an interesting Gzer Shava to tell us what the pasuk is counting from. So Rashi says Shnas Esrim Shana, Shnas Esrim Gzer Shava. Rav Papa, I'm sorry, I'm not sure where it is, where a Papa's is. But let's hear Rashi. Rav Papa Kulu Shnas Sheva Pasuk the Tzrichi Lil Moidzamizeh. Rav Papa holds anytime it says Shnas and it gives us a number of a year, it's always something that teaches us to other places where it says a similar. The Tzrichi Lil Moidzamizeh. You always have to learn Shnas from Shnas. Kulu Garmalu Rav Papa me Rabbi. Rav Papa learned from his Rabbi Kabbalah. Lil Moitzasim and Amafarish Al Yidin Gzer Shava. You can use a Din Gzer Shava. Whenever it says Shnas and it gives a number, anytime it says that, you can compare it to other places in the Torah where it says it. So I don't know where it is, but it's a Kabbalah that Rav Papa had. Umimai, the Maisa, the Av Kodim. How do you know that the story that happened in Av, meaning how do you know Aaron HaKohen died before Moshe spoke? Dilma Maisa the Shvat Kodim. Ein Muktam Uma'ucha B'Torah. Just because it says that Aaron died in Av, and then later on in Shvat is when Moshe spoke to Klal Yisrael, and we say there must have been a Rosh Hashanah in between. Who said? Maybe when the pasuk says later that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Klal Yisrael in Shvat, maybe that was before Aaron died, because ein muktam u'mucha b'Torah. So it's not mistaber to say that way. You know why? Because we know for a fact that Sichon was alive when Aaron died. The Chsiv, it says in Devarim, where Moshe spoke to Klal Yisrael, that when Moshe spoke to them, it was Acharei HaKoisa Yasichon. It was already after Sichon had died. V'chinach nafshei Aaron, but when Aaron was nifter, Akati Havasichon Kayim. Sichon was still alive. So it must be that Aaron died before that story in Shvat when Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Klal Yisrael. And how do I know that when Aaron died, Sichon was still alive? The Chsiv, it says in the pasuk, Vayishma HaKenaini Melech Arad, the Kenaini, the king of Arad, came and they attacked Klal Yisrael. Let's look at the pasuk. Vayishma Kenaini Melech Arad, Yosy HaNegev, Kiva Yisrael derech HaSarim. He saw that Klal Yisrael was coming up to the Hasarim, and therefore Vayilachem BeYisrael Vayesh Mimeni Shevi. So it says that they came. So for the fact that it says they came, it must be that they were still alive, because this Vayish Makani happened after Aaron died. So it must be that, how do we know it was after Aaron died? Because Mashmua Shama, what exactly did the Knani hear that gave them the chutzpah and the courage to try to challenge Klal Yisrael? Shama Shemes Aaron. They heard that Aaron HaKohen died. The Nistalku Ananei HaKavod, and Klal Yisrael lost the protection of the Ananei HaKavod. And therefore, once they saw that, they thought now it's open country on Klal Yisrael. They can attack. Hashem took away their protection. That's where they came to fight. So before I go weiter, I wish David Zolti was here because he would help us here a lot. Because we're quoting a pasuk, V'yishma Knani Melech Harod, and the Gemara is telling us black and white that what did the Knani hear? The Knani heard that it was Nestalku Ananei HaKavod. The problem is it actually says twice, V'yishma Knani. And one of the psukim is like our Gemara quotes in Bamidbar. But Tosfos argues, and Tosfos says this is the wrong pasuk. And Tosfos says a reason for it. So let's look at the top Tosfos. V'yishma Knani the Melech Harod. In the Medrash it says, Amrina and the Hainu Amalek. It says Vayishma Kanani, but in fact these were not Kanani. These were Amalekim. Kamosha Yisir Apayit, the Pizman Shal Pasha Zachar. Ksus, they were covered, they were disguised. The Lashon Shina, Hayois Kemelach Harad. The Lashon is that he dressed up. The Amalekim dressed up like Knainim. They wanted to fool Klal Yisrael into davening for the wrong Yeshua. So Oibazai, what's the ride that Sichon was alive? Maybe he was dead. Zok Toises Amikamakum Daik Shaper. It must be that Sichon was alive. Amalek wouldn't have dressed up like a dead king. That would have been a dead giveaway, literally, right? So therefore, he had to dress up like a king who it could have been real. Otherwise, he wouldn't have fooled him. So that's what Tosfos tells us. But Zok Tosfos, the Nira Mehuda Masay Kadarish. We're not bringing a raya from the pasuk that our Torah are quotes, which is talking about in Bamidbar, because the Imahida Chukas. If it's from the Parsha of Chukas, which is the pasuk that's quoted on our margin, Hamafarish, you don't need drushes to tell us what made them come because they heard Aaron died. The pasuk says black and white why they came. This Shama ki ba Yisrael derech ha'asarim. You look at the pasuk, Vishma Knani Melech Arod Yosef. What did he hear? Ki ba Yisrael derech ha'asarim. So don't dash and hear some other thing. It's very simple. Klal Yisrael getting close. They're a threat. Zok Tosfos v'Rashi loydak the Pirusha b'Chumash. If you look up this pasuk in Chukas, in Chumash, Rashi quotes this drush. So Zokta is Rashi not being medik. Rashi is just quoting it from our Gemara, but really our Gemara is referring to a similar pasuk in Devarim where it says the same thing. That was a very interesting Chumash Rashi chiddush that we can learn from here. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back. This is one of my favorite psukim. So why was Klal Yisrael under threat from the Knainim? Or from the Amalekim that were dressed up like the Knainim, because they were exposed, because they lost the protection of the Ananei HaKavod. And that's shot in the pasuk. It says Vayiru Kala Eda Kigav Aaron. Pasuk shot is Vayiru. They became afraid, or they saw that Aaron died, or they became afraid because Aaron died. But Amar Rabavo tells us, and Rashi brings this down off an art in Chumash. Al Triki Vayiru. Don't read it Vayiru. They saw, they feared. Rather, they became seen, they became exposed. Like Rish Lakish said. The word key, it says ki gava iron. The word key, meshamish bedalad lashonos. It can be used for 4 different types of phrases. Dilma, ela, daha. It could be used for all reasons. Daha means because of, and that's exactly what it's saying over here. Why were Klal Yisrael afraid? Why were they revealed? Why were they exposed? Ki gava Aaron, because Aaron died. So you see that they became exposed because Aaron HaKohen died. They lost Ananei HaKavod. That's right. So there's a very interesting Rashi here that goes through clearly the 4 versions of ki. And since we're a little bit ahead of the game, we might as well learn the Rashi because it's a very interesting Rashi. So it's the very first Rashi at the top of Amud Beis, the second Rashi, on top of Mez Kedei Rish Lakish. Ki gava. They saw, or they revealed, they're exposed ki gava. It's nesinas tamhu l'davar shalafana. Here the key is daha. It's explaining what the clause before was. Exactly. Nisgalu ha'eda. Why were the eda exposed? Lafisha gava Aaron. And that's the lashon daha. Zok Rashi shaloshin ki bedalet l'shoynos mishamish b'mikvah. If you analyze the psukim in Tanakh, you'll find that the word ki is used for 4 different types of expressions. Sometimes it comes b'makamim if this happens, and Rashi will tell us shortly that means if something happens, it's something that always does happen. It's something that does happen. Maybe it will happen, and we'll see examples of that. Like in our case, we're explaining, the pasuk is explaining why Klal Yisrael was exposed, and which actually sometimes it's changing from what was said before. And now Rashi gives examples which gives us clarity. It says ki yilem davar, if people have a sakalacha that they are seeking, ki sivka, if you meet a sharachecha, right, or ki yikare katibra kulam lashon imhem, they all have a lashon of im, of if. I'm sorry, right? Of if the chen ki savoyu, when you go ki seleichen, ki sechala, when you finished harvesting, ki sisa, v'chola mishamshim v'mokam kasher. All of these words ki that mean kasher when this happens. V'mokam kasher kulam lashon imhem. It means if it happens. Shematzinu become a mekaymis im mishamish lashon kasher v'lashon asher. Kamoy another place you find the im yiyayovel when yovel will come, but it doesn't really mean if it will come. It means when. Shari bevada yiga yovel will for sure come. So one version, one use for the word ki is when this happens, but it will for sure happen. Now we have another version. The imsak of minchas bikurim. I'm sorry. This is also the same key that of im when it happens. The imsak of minchas bikurim harei the chasher taka means and when you do it, you surely will do it. You will for sure lend someone money. It's a normal thing. If it's going to be swallowed in the ground, I don't know the case of Iyos. I don't know the case there of Erev. Hamadaber b'shalvos Rishoyim, which is speaking about the easy life that Rishoyim have. Dilma, where's the lashon Dilma? You might, if you're threatened, if you say in your heart, Shema Tomer, you might say. It's not when you will say. You might say, you might have this concern that Rabbim Hagoyim Ha'ela, Loi Shomer King, don't say that. Rather, Loi Sira Mahem, you shouldn't be afraid of them. Or Ki Soimru, Ma Nirdaf Loi Niyai, where it also means if you might have this thought, but of course it's not as if it's something that's for sure going to come. The Chi Soimru, Ma Noichel B'Shana Shvi'is, or if you'll have the thought to question, what are you going to eat on Shemitah when you're not allowed to plant? Again, this is not something that's going to happen. It's talking about something that could possibly happen. There's many examples in Tanakh of ki that means maybe, but it doesn't mean that's good. It doesn't mean when, it means if. Then you have loy tzachachti ki areya. Then you have Sarah Imenu, who said, I did not laugh. Why? Because she was afraid. Harei lashon da. That's already similar to us. Why did she deny that she laughed? Because she was afraid. Because she was afraid. And that's our version. Klal Yisrael was exposed because Aaron HaKohen died. Remember, like Yitzchak, Terez Lashon Ella. Oh no! And when Hashem responded, Loy Kitzachak, there it's Ella. Loy, you're wrong. Don't say you didn't laugh. Kitzachak, because you did laugh. So there, Ki means Ella, contradicting what Sarah said before. So Ki Gava Aaron, getting back to our case, Ki Gava Aaron, Yisha'ata Kara Vayiro, if you will read the word Vayiro as Vayiro and Klal was exposed, then Hareza Lashon Daha. Then the key in the Ki Gava Aaron would be explaining why were they exposed, because Aaron died. Hoydul Hashem Ki Tov, Sharei Tov. Why should you thank Hashem? Ki Tov, because it's good. Okay, so this is, now we have a beautiful understanding of how the word ki is used. In our case, it's used to explain the earlier clause in the pasuk. Okay, I just want to bring out a very interesting, cute vart that I once heard. I once heard that it says, "Vayu b'nei Yisrael kagav," Klal Yisrael was seen. So the pasuk shot, which the Medrash tells us, is they were seen because they were no longer protected by the Ananei HaKavod. But someone once spoke by Sheva Brachas. He said over a beautiful, beautiful vart. He said, "There's a shidduch crisis. Nobody can find a husband. Nobody can find a wife." So he says, "I'll tell you why there's a shidduch crisis. Because everybody wants the best boy. Everybody wants the best boy in Lakewood. So let's say his name is Shaul Rubinoff, right? Everybody wants Shaul Rubinoff. So because of that, if you read me a shidduch, you want to read me a shidduch, my daughter, Shaul, it's not Shaul. That's all people want. You ready me Shaul? I'm not. If you're not ready me Shaul, I'm not interested. Why? Because people only want the best boy. The moment the best boy gets married, he's not available anymore. Now, there's another boy like with Shimon yet? Tell me about him. Now I want to hear about him. Because as long as you have such a chashav a chasen or a chashav a kala that's available, nobody wants to hear from any other shidduchim. They only want to hear about that one. Once they get engaged, once they get married, they're not around anymore. Suddenly, there's a lot of other good boys out there, and there's a lot of other good girls out there. The same thing with Aaron HaKohen. When Aaron HaKohen was around, he was the pinnacle. Nobody gave attention to any other Talmud Chacham, any other tzaddik. Aaron HaKohen. Once Aaron HaKohen died, you know what? Reb Chaim's also gone a big lamdan, and Reb David's also gone a big tzaddik, and Reb Shmuel's also gone a big Baal Chesed. So because of that, Klal Yisrael started to be seen because they were no longer eclipsed by the greatness of Aaron HaKohen. So now the shidduch crisis is solved. Now that Shaul is married, and now that Esi's married, boom! Now the shidduch crisis is solved because no one's holding out anymore. It's too late; they're not available anymore. Okay, Zakta Gemara weiter. That's Kavir means they were seen.
They were afraid.
They were afraid.
That's strong off. You means they were afraid.
It's right. They lost that Rebbe. They lost Aaron HaKohen.
They will take protection.
So you're saying even if it means fear, it can also be explained with the ki gava ahar and chadam. Okay, that would be the pasuk of pshat. That would be the pasuk of pshat that they were afraid because Aaron died. But by Yiro they were revealed. Well, either way, it's an indirect consequence of Aaron HaKohen being nifter. So, what's b'chalal derai? Hasam Kanan hachasicha, and you're mixing things up. Here it says Vayishma Knani Melech Harod, and you're trying to say that Sichon was still alive when Aaron HaKohen died. How does this pasuk show that Sichon was still alive when Aaron HaKohen died? This is talking about the Knanim. It's not talking about Sichon. So the Gemara, Tana, who Sichon, who Arad, who Canaan. Sichon, Arad, and Canaan were all the same person. Sichon, why was he referred to as Sichon? Shedoima l'sayich b'midbar. He was like a wild donkey in a midbar, someone who causes damage wherever he goes. Canaan, why was it called Canaan? Al Shal Malchusay, that happened to be the name of his kingdom. Uma Shemoy, what is his personal name? Arad Shemoy. Ikadamar, Arad was not his real name. Arad Shedoima l'Arad b'midbar. He was doing it to a wild Arad. Rashi says it's a Chamor Habar. So through the Sayich is an Ayr Ben Sus. And Arad is a Chamor Habar. He's a wild horse or a wild donkey. So the Sayich is a wild horse, and the Arad is a wild donkey. Either way, something that causes a lot of damage and a lot of trouble. Canaan al Shena Husay, Umashmoy, what was the name that his mother gave him by his bris? Sichon Shmoy. That was his real name. Frag to Gemara, the Ema, Rosh Hashana year, maybe it was an year. All we prove from the pasuk is we have two dates. We have Av is where Aaron HaKohen died, and we have Shvat is when Moshe Rabbeinu spoke. So all you see from there is that the Rosh Hashana could not have been between Av and Shvat. So it couldn't be El, it couldn't be Tishrei, it couldn't be Cheshvan, it couldn't be Kislev, it couldn't be Teves, because then the year should have changed over. But maybe it's Iyar. How do you know that it's Nisan? Maybe it's Iyar, and it would still fit in pretty well that the death of Aaron HaKohen and the speaking of Moshe Rabbeinu to Klal Yisrael would have still been in the same year. So it's not logical to say that the month where the year changes over is Iyar. It says in the pasuk, it was on the first month, on the second year, so we're talking about the first day of Nisan on the second year. Hukama Mishkan, that was the day that the Mishkan was completed. It says, it was on the second year, on the second month. Let's look up on the 20th day of Chodesh. So Zok the Gemara, with the Koyben Nisan, we're in Nisan. V'karilei Shana Shenis. When we were in Nisan, it called it Shana Shenis because it says V'chi b'chodesh harishan b'Shana Shenis. So Nisan was the very first month of the year, and we're saying it's year number 2. And then it says V'koy be'iyar, and the next pasuk where it says V'hi b'chodesh harishan b'Shana Shenis b'echad hachodesh. Sorry, it says V'hi b'Shana Shenis b'chodesh hasheni, which is then chodesh iyar, and it's also V'karilei Shana Shniya. If in Nisan it was the second year, and in Iyar is the second year, it shows us clearly that there was not a year change when the month went from Nisan to Iyar. So therefore, Machlal, the Rosh Hashanah Lav Iyar. It could not have been that Rosh Hashanah was Iyar, because if it was, then when it was speaking about Iyar, it should have already been in the 3rd year, because Iyar would have changed the year. So you see clearly that the year did not change in Iyar. Fine. The Ema Rosh Hashanah Sivan, maybe it was Sivan. It's also not a month that's between Av and Shvat. So maybe it's Sivan. So it's not mistaber to say that it was Sivan either. The Chsivit says in the Pasuk, V'chodesh hashlishi, l'tzeis b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, v'yoyim ezah bo'u midbar Sinai. So it says, V'm'iza, it says V'chodesh hashlishi, which is referring to Sivan, the month that we're discussing. V'm'iza, V'chodesh hashlishi, v'shana hashenis, l'tzeis b'nei Yisrael. If the year changes in Sivan, so the very first year where Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim, the 3rd month would have been Sivan, that automatically should switch it over to year 2. And we don't see that the pasuk says it pushes it over to year 2. The pasuk seems to indicate that it's just a continuation of the same year. So therefore, Sivan cannot be a Rosh Chodesh, cannot be the year that can't be the Rosh Hashanah where the year changes over. So it should say B'Shana Shenis Lotzeis Bin B'Bayil. Those are the 3 remaining consistent with the 2 psukim of Aaron HaKohen dying and Moshe Rabbeinu speaking to Klal Yisrael. And because of that, so Rabbi Elazar says, I'm going to now seek another pshat. I'm going to seek another makar to show that Rosh Chodesh is Nisan. Because it says, Vayachal livnois, V'chodesh hasheni, b'sheni, Shishnas arba l'malchus. So let's see the pasuk inside. I'm looking for above. Vayochel, not Vayochel, Vayochel livnois. He started to build V'chodesh hasheni on the 2nd month, b'sheni, which we're not sure what that means yet. Shishnas arba l'malchus. So Frank the Gemara, my sheni. Whatever it repeats the word sheni, b'chodesh hasheni, b'sheni. It should say b'chodesh hasheni. So why did it say that word again, sheni? My sheni. It tells us that sheni leyerach shemoinin boy l'malchusai. That extra sheni is a limit in and unto itself to teach us that it's the 2nd month from the month that you count for the malchus of Shlomo. So v'yochel livnos b'chodesh hasheni, b'sheni, the 2nd month since Shlomo HaMelech became king, and we counted that year as a king. So that's what you see from the extra word sheni. Frag the Gemara, why is the word b'sheni an extra word? Matzchach v'lo Rabina. Maybe sheni b'chodesh. Maybe b'sheni means it was the 2nd day of the month. So there's nothing to learn from this pasuk. Zok the Gemara, im kain sheni b'chodesh v'hed yahav. Whenever the Torah refers to a day in the month, the Torah always says b'chodesh. The Torah always tells us that it's b'chodesh. And if we look to the right and down into Rashi, b'chodesh v'hed yahav ksivbei v'dichsiv b'kama makoymos. Many places where the Torah wants to give the day of the month, the Torah says b'echad lachodesh. Here it just says b'sheni. It's not likely to learn that it's referring to the 2nd day of the month. So therefore, it's extra sheni again, which tells us that we're counting from Nisan when we're talking about the malchus of the malachim. Maybe b'sheni is telling you what day of the week it was on. Maybe it's a shaila of what day of the week it was on. Zok the Gemara, we don't say that. Chada d'loy ashkechon sheni b'shabos d'chsiv. You don't find that it would say that. Rashi says sheni b'shabos l'ashkem ksiv beikra the hadar beikra b'sheni. You don't find that the Torah does that. V'oid maka sheni basra l'sheni kama. We would compare the sheni, the 2nd word that it says sheni in the pasuk, to the first time it says sheni in the pasuk. Ma sheni kama chodesh, av sheni basra chodesh. They're both referring to a month, not a day of the week. And therefore, we have an extra word sheni, which Rabbi Elazar uses to tell us that when we're counting the years of a melech, we count from Nisan. Zok to Gemara. Now this basically rounds up the whole Gemara because we just went through a whole series of psukim that Rabbi Yochanan needed to prove that the month that we're referring to is Nisan. So if we do a quick review of the psukim that he used, we're going to have that right now. Because the Gemara says, Tanya Kabasa Rabbi Yochanan, and Tosha tells us it's not only Rabbi Yochanan, but Lazar as well, because we're going to have a brisa that's very briefly going to list off all the psukim that we just learned, because it's agreeing with the entire thought process, the entire cheshbon that we made today. So Tanya Kabasa Rabbi Yochanan, Minayin she'ein moinin lahem lemalachim elam Nisan. The Tana asks, how do we know that we count from Nisan? Shenemar vahiba shmonim shana va'arba me'a shana l'tzeis b'nei Yisrael merit Mitzrayim. So if we look back to what we learned earlier, the Gemara brought that pasuk as well, and it says that's referring to the month that Shlomo Melech became Melech al Yisrael, and we said we're Makash Machal Shlomo Yitzis Mitzrayim. Right, so that was the first link. The first link is comparing the month that we count the Malchus from to the month that we count Yitzis Mitzrayim from. So that was that pasuk in our Gemara. Then how do we know that it's Nisan by the Yitzis Mitzrayim? It says Vayal Ayin HaKoyin Al Har Har Pi Hashem. So this was Av of the 40th year, which tells us all these psukim that the speech that Moshe made was in Shvat, and we know that Sichain was alive when Aaron died, and he wasn't alive, and he died later. So that proves that at least that Rosh Hashanah cannot be between Av and Shvat. Which is Rabbi Eliezer's pasuk. To tell us that you only have Chadashim. So basically, the brisa here lists off all of the psukim that we had listed off from Rabbi Yochanan and from Eliezer, which clearly shows that the brisa has the same cheshbon. Okay, we're ahead, and we'll stop here.